My name is Lucas. I'm a 37-year-old father living just outside Eugene, Oregon. I work in residential remodeling, mostly kitchens and decks, real salt-of-the-earth kind of stuff. My wife, Jenna, stays home with our daughter, Tessa. She's 6. Our life, up until last fall, was quiet. No real drama. No social media scandals, no ghosts, no weird family secrets, just the usual family ups and downs. And that's what makes this whole thing harder to explain. Because when life has been so normal, you don't expect evil to come wrapped in pink ribbons and plastic limbs. But it did. It started on a rainy Thursday. Oregon rain isn't like Midwest storms. It's more of a heavy, constant mist that soaks you through without making a sound. That afternoon, my mother dropped by unexpectedly. Her name is Susan, and she's complicated. The kind of woman who hugs you too tight but never actually listens to what you say. She's been in and out of our lives, sometimes helpful, sometimes overbearing. But when she showed up that day with a gift in her arms, I didn't think much of it. She said it was just a little something she picked up from a vintage shop downtown. That phrase alone, *vintage shop*, should have tipped me off. But I didn't ask questions. Because how do you question your own mother when she's smiling and saying, "It reminded me of Tessa" when I saw it? It was a doll. Not the cheap, modern kind with big heads and stretchy outfits. This one looked old. Porcelain. Hand-painted features, glass eyes. The kind that little girls from the 1930s might have clutched during wartime train rides. Tessa, of course, lit up like it was Christmas morning. She named it Bella before dinner. I remember the way she carried it around the house like a baby. She even cleared out one of her dresser drawers and filled it with washcloths as a makeshift crib. It was sweet, I guess. Until it wasn't. Because that night was the first time Tessa didn't sleep straight through. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard footsteps. Not quick ones, slow, hesitant ones. Then her little voice from the hallway, trembling. "Daddy?" I sat up immediately. I thought she'd had a nightmare. Kids do. But when I met her at the door, she was pale, shaking, and her bottom lip was quivering. "Bella blinked at me," she whispered. She blinked when I was pretending to sleep. I remember how surreal that moment was. I kneeled down, gave her a hug, and told her dolls can't blink. That maybe she was dreaming, or her eyes were playing tricks on her. She nodded, but didn't say anything else. I brought her back to bed and tucked her in myself. But as I pulled her blanket over her tiny frame, something made my skin crawl. Bella, the doll, was sitting upright on the dresser. And I could have sworn I left her lying down earlier. The next few nights followed a pattern. It always happened at night. The thud of her closet door. Whispering sounds. Tessa waking up crying, saying things like she was standing this time, or her head turned when I blinked. Each time, I told myself kids have overactive imaginations. Maybe I was the one losing sleep, and my own exhaustion was bleeding into how I interpreted things. But then, I started noticing something strange. Every morning, Bella was in a slightly different position. Once she was on the rocking chair by the window. Once in the hallway, outside Tessa's room entirely. Once, she was sitting upright on the kitchen table with Tessa still asleep upstairs. That time, I felt my stomach twist in a way I couldn't explain. I thought maybe Jenna was moving it around? I asked. She said no. Then we both asked Tessa. Her response? "I never touch her at night, Daddy. She doesn't like being moved." That sentence sent a chill right down my spine. Still, maybe the doll fell. Maybe someone bumped something. Maybe our cat got curious and moved her somehow. You tell yourself anything to avoid considering the impossible. But deep down, I knew something was off. And what confirmed it wasn't my daughter. It wasn't even my wife. It was my mother. 3 weeks after she gave us the doll, Susan came over again. Tessa was out in the backyard playing in the leaves. Jenna was upstairs doing laundry. And I casually asked her about the doll. "Where'd you find it anyway?" I said, trying to keep my voice light. Her answer froze the blood in my veins. "Oh, that thing," she said. "Is it still around? Honestly, I kind of hoped you'd toss it." Gave me the creeps, to be honest. It blinked at me in the car. I laughed, nervously. Thought she was joking. But she wasn't. She kept talking. It was just sitting there on a shelf with a bunch of dusty teddy bears. The owner practically gave it away. Said it belonged to some little girl who died in the 1940s. There was a name scrawled on the bottom of its foot, but it was hard to read. Something like Eileen or Elira. I don't know. Look, I don't believe in that haunted stuff, but that doll, I had to keep it in the trunk the whole ride home. I swear, I kept hearing tapping from inside the box. At that point, I couldn't laugh it off anymore. I could feel something tightening around our house, like the walls were listening. That night, I took Bella and put her in the hallway closet, behind a box of winter coats and Christmas ornaments. I didn't tell Tessa. I just told her Bella was resting for a while. And for a few days, everything seemed fine. Tessa slept through the night. She played outside more. She started drawing again, flowers, suns, happy things. Until one night she woke up screaming so loud it jolted us both out of bed. We ran into her room, flipping on the lights. She was curled into a ball, pointing at the foot of her bed. Her eyes were wide. She was pale as paper, and her voice cracked when she said it. She blinked again. She got out. And there Bella was, sitting right at the end of the bed. Her little porcelain head tilted at an unnatural angle, staring straight at me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Not after seeing Bella back in Tessa's room, sitting at the foot of the bed, as if she'd never been moved at all. I kept replaying every moment in my head, every step I took from the moment I hid her in the hallway closet. I remembered the weight of the coats, the creak of the door as I shut it, the hollow thud when I pushed the box against it for good measure. I hadn't forgotten. I hadn't gotten lazy or distracted. I was deliberate. That's what scared me more than anything, because that meant someone else had moved her. And if that someone wasn't me or Jenna or Tessa, then who? Or what? Jenna sat on the edge of Tessa's bed, trying to calm her down. Our daughter's cheeks were flushed with panic, her little hands gripping the blanket, so tight her knuckles were white. She kept glancing at the doll, afraid to look away. She said she missed me, she mumbled, barely audible. She said she was cold in the dark. That was when I picked Bella up with both hands, trying to keep my face calm for Tessa's sake. She wasn't heavy, but something about holding her made my arms feel numb, like I was holding something old and charged, like forgotten electricity trapped inside porcelain. I took her to the garage, shoved her into a storage bin, and locked the lid with one of my contractor-grade padlocks. I even put the bin on a high shelf, just for good measure. Then I sat up the rest of the night, sipping cold coffee and staring out at the fogged-up backyard, wondering what the hell was going on in my house. The next morning, I called Jenna's brother, Paul. He's kind of a skeptic by nature, always teasing us about our Pinterest parenting and how we let Tessa sleep with crystals under her pillow for energy alignment. But he's also meticulous, analytical. I thought maybe if I laid everything out logically, he'd tell me what I was missing, that I'd overlooked something obvious. I told him everything about the doll moving, about the blinking, about Tessa's nightmares. He chuckled at first, then stopped when I told him about the garage padlock. "You sure your wife didn't move it?" he asked. I told him Jenna was as freaked out as I was. "Then maybe you need to ask yourself a tougher question," he said. "Is it possible Tessa is doing it herself?" That theory stuck with me all day. I watched Tessa more closely, not in a suspicious way, but just to see, to catch some kind of clue. But all I saw was a kid trying to act normal, trying to draw her rainbows and eat her waffles and watch her cartoons like everything wasn't completely off-kilter. She didn't go near the garage, didn't even glance toward it. And that night, when she tucked herself into bed, she whispered to Jenna, "I think Bella's still watching me." Jenna didn't say anything. She just kissed her forehead and walked out of the room, but I saw the fear in her eyes. The next morning, I checked the garage first thing. The padlock was still there, still shut tight. The bin hadn't moved. I opened it slowly, half expecting the doll to be gone again. But there she was, sitting perfectly still. Same crooked smile, same glass eyes that caught the light like a predator in the woods. For a moment, I felt ridiculous, like I'd let this thing crawl too deep into my brain. So I slammed the lid shut and tried to go about my day. But then Tessa started drawing things. Not her usual sunshine and clouds kind of stuff. These were different. She brought one to me that afternoon, held it up with a quiet look on her face that made my stomach twist. It was a picture of her bedroom, drawn in crayon with shaky, uneven lines. Her bed, her dresser, her nightlight, and Bella. But not just sitting on the bed, standing. Standing beside the bed, taller than she should be. Long arms, hollow eyes, a crooked mouth that seemed to move. I asked her what it was. That's how she looks when the lights go out, she said. That's when I decided we needed help. Now here's where things start to get murky. And if you've ever gone down a Reddit rabbit hole or watched those real haunted doll caught on camera videos on TikTok, you might think you know where this is going. But I promise, it's not what you expect. Because we didn't call a priest. We didn't burn sage. We called a therapist. Jenna's friend from her mom group, Danielle, recommended someone who worked with children processing trauma. I wasn't convinced, but we were desperate. Her name was Dr. Hartley, and she came over to the house that Saturday. Tessa seemed to like her immediately. Calm voice, soft scarf, carried herself like someone who'd seen a lot of darkness and survived it. I didn't tell her about the doll at first. I wanted her to focus on Tessa. But after 2 sessions, she asked to speak with me privately. Has your daughter experienced any recent loss? She asked. I told her no. Any new environments? Friends? Changes in the family dynamic? Again, no. Everything had been stable until Bella showed up. So I told her the full story. And when I finished, Dr. Hartley didn't laugh. She didn't even flinch. She just said, sometimes children manifest experiences through objects. They put feelings into something external because it's easier to process. Dolls, stuffed animals, even shadows in the corner of a room. Then she leaned in a little closer. But sometimes, Lucas, those objects start showing signs that the feelings aren't just from your child. The way she said it chilled me. Calm, but not dismissive. Like she'd heard this kind of thing before. Asked if she believed the doll could actually be haunted. She smiled faintly. I don't believe in haunted dolls, she said. But I do believe some things attach themselves to grief, anger, and fear. Especially when a child's involved. And that's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years, something I hadn't connected to any of this until that moment. A girl named Elira. She was my cousin. Lived 2 houses down from us when I was 10. We used to play together after school, mostly hide and seek in the woods. One day, she didn't show up. They found her in the river, 3 miles from her house. The official cause was an accidental fall, but nobody really knew how she got so far. She had a doll she took everywhere, porcelain just like Bella. I hadn't thought of her in decades. But now I couldn't shake the thought that maybe this doll wasn't random. That maybe my mother, without realizing it, had brought something back from that same darkness. I went back to that vintage store the next day. It was gone. Completely emptied out. Space for lease, sign in the window. I tried searching the name online, nothing. Jenna even checked old credit card statements to find a transaction. Nothing. It was like the shop had never existed. I asked my mother again where she got the doll. She shrugged. I don't know, honey. One of those side streets downtown. You know how those places pop up. That's when things started escalating. The house grew colder. Lights flickered. Doors clicked open when no one touched them. I'd come downstairs in the morning to find drawers open, faucet dripping, and always, always asterisk. That feeling like someone had just been there. Like I'd interrupted something. Tessa stopped sleeping altogether. She'd lie in bed, eyes wide open, whispering lullabies to herself. When we asked why, she said, so she knows I'm awake. I wish I could say that was the worst of it. But something else happened, something even I can't explain. One night, I went out to the garage to check the storage bin again. The padlock was still in place, but I felt this sick pull in my gut, like gravity was warping around it. I opened it slowly. Bella was gone. In her place was something else, a piece of old yellowed paper, folded into quarters. I unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a drawing. A child's drawing. The lines were faded, but it was unmistakable, a house. My house, and standing in front of it was Bella, holding a little girl's hand. The name scribbled at the bottom? Elira. And just as I turned to call Jenna, the garage light snapped off. That's when I heard it. The slow creak of porcelain limbs, and the whisper of a lullaby in the dark. The next morning, I didn't tell Jenna about the drawing in the garage. I wanted to, God, I should have, but something inside me whispered that if I said it out loud, if I put that moment into words, it would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Instead, I tucked it into the back of a drawer in my nightstand, underneath an old folder of receipts and documents we hadn't touched since refinancing the house. But from that moment on, I was different. Hyper-aware. Tense. I kept waiting for the next thing to happen. And it did, but not the way I expected. I'd started keeping notes. Times. Details. Patterns. Like some DIY paranormal investigator glued together with YouTube videos and late-night Reddit threads. One of the most searched phrases I kept running into was real haunted object proof, and almost every time, it was followed by surveillance footage or recordings. So I decided to try it myself. I bought a cheap motion-activated camera, the kind you'd use to monitor a baby or a pet, and set it up in the garage facing the locked storage bin. I didn't tell anyone, not even Jenna. I needed confirmation. I needed evidence. For 2 nights, nothing happened. The feed showed the same grainy darkness, the occasional shift of shadows, and one moment when a spider crawled across the lens and nearly gave me a heart attack. But on the 3rd night, something changed. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the camera shut off. Not powered down. *cut star. The file ended abruptly with a crackling pop of static, like someone had yanked the cord. When I checked the garage that morning, the padlock was gone. Not broken, not tampered with, *gone star. The bin was still closed, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. When I finally did, Bella was back. Sitting exactly how I'd left her days earlier, like she'd never moved. Like I had imagined all of it. But I hadn't, because the drawing was missing. I tore the nightstand apart, checked the trash, the furnace, the crawl space, even the storm drain behind the backyard. The drawing was just gone. That was the first real sign that something or someone was trying to stop me. And suddenly, I wasn't sure which was more terrifying, the idea of a haunted doll, or the possibility that a very real person was watching me, listening to me, and slowly removing the pieces before I could put them together. I told Paul, Jenna's brother, about the camera footage and the missing drawing. He listened carefully, then said something that didn't sit right with me. "You're not going to like this," he said, "but have you considered Jenna might be behind it?" I scoffed. "Why would she do that?" He paused. "Because she's scared. Or maybe because she knows something you don't." That idea gnawed at me. Jenna had been quieter lately, distant. Not cold, but preoccupied. She'd been going for long drives after Tessa fell asleep, saying she needed air, space to think. I hadn't pushed her on it. We were both under pressure. But now, I couldn't help but wonder, what was she thinking about out there, alone in the dark? That night, I confronted her gently. I didn't accuse her. I just told her everything I knew. The missing padlock. The camera cutting off. The drawing being gone. I even told her about what Paul said. She didn't get defensive. She didn't yell. She just stared at me. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, barely above a whisper. "Because I thought it would only make things worse. But maybe it's already too late." Then she walked upstairs, opened her jewelry box, and pulled out something I hadn't seen before. A photograph. Faded, dog-eared, clearly old. She handed it to me, and my heart dropped. It was a little girl. Not Tessa. Not Jenna. A girl in a faded white dress, standing in front of a farmhouse. In her arms was Bella, or a doll just like her. On the back of the photo, in careful handwriting, it said, *Elira, age 7. Jenna looked at me and said, "That's my aunt. My mom's younger sister. She died when she was 7. They never told me how. Only that she drowned." I couldn't breathe. "Your aunt?" I whispered. "Your aunt's name was Elira?" Jenna nodded. When your mom gave Tessa that doll, I recognized it. I'd seen it in photo albums at my grandmother's house. I thought it was just a coincidence at first. Dolls looked similar back then. But when Tessa started saying the name, when she started drawing the house, I remembered. My grandmother told me Elira used to say the doll talked to her. That revelation changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just a creepy toy from a secondhand shop. This was family history, asterisk her asterisk history. And somehow, it had crossed into our daughter's life. I asked why she didn't tell me. She looked exhausted. Because I didn't want to believe it was real. Because if I admitted it, I'd have to accept that something from our family followed us here. And I didn't know how to fight it. The next day, I tried contacting Jenna's grandmother. She lived in a care facility 3 towns over. We drove up that afternoon, desperate for answers. The woman who met us at the front desk looked uncomfortable when we asked about her. She doesn't talk much anymore, she said. Her memory's not great. Some days, she doesn't recognize her own children. Still, they let us in. Her name was Meredith. Thin, with a nest of white hair and eyes that seemed to drift somewhere behind the present. When Jenna sat beside her and said, "Grandma, it's me, Jenna," the old woman smiled faintly. But when I pulled out the photo and set it in front of her, everything changed. She blinked, stared at it for a long moment. Then her face twisted into something dark. "That doll," she said. "That thing." Her voice cracked like dry paper. "I told your mother to burn it. I told her it would come back." We tried asking questions, but she grew agitated. Kept repeating the same sentence. "It never stays buried. Not forever." Eventually, the nurses asked us to leave. Jenna was shaking the whole drive home. I tried to calm her, but I was barely holding it together myself. That night, Tessa didn't eat dinner. She just sat at the table, staring off into space. Her eyes were glassy. When I asked her what was wrong, she whispered, "She's mad at you now, Daddy. She knows you saw her picture." I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just lay in bed, trying to piece it all together. How our daughter could somehow be connected to a girl who died 80 years ago, and why that same doll kept coming back, no matter where we hid it. I kept thinking about what Meredith had said. It never stays buried. That line stuck with me the next morning when I went outside to fix a loose panel on the side of our fence. It had nothing to do with the doll, but I needed to do something with my hands, something normal. That's when I saw it. A patch of dirt near the base of our old oak tree. The grass had died around it in a perfect circle, maybe 3 feet wide. I didn't remember seeing it before. Curious, I walked over. The soil was loose, like someone had recently dug and filled it back in. I got a shovel. The digging wasn't easy. The earth was thick, wet with old rain. After about 2 feet down, the blade hit something solid. Wood. A small wooden box, maybe the size of a shoebox. I hauled it out and wiped the dirt away. No markings, no hinges, just sealed with age and pressure. I opened it slowly, not even sure what I was expecting. Inside was another doll, but not Bella. This one was older. Cracked. Missing one eye. Her dress was rotting, and her face had a burn mark across the cheek. And beneath her was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, my hands trembling. It was another drawing, same style, same childlike scribbles. But this one was different. It showed 2 girls. One was Elira. The other was Tessa. I stood there, clutching the weather-worn drawing with mud-streaked fingers, the chill of the morning air suddenly feeling sharper against my skin. My knees were buried in the damp earth, the unearthed box sitting in the grass beside me, and all I could do was stare at that disturbing image. 2 little girls drawn in shaky, childlike lines, standing side by side. One had the name Elira written beneath her, the other, Tessa. The crayon strokes were smudged with moisture and age, but the implication was unmistakable. Somehow, across decades, across generations, someone or something was drawing a connection between my daughter and a girl who had died before I was even born. That should have been the breaking point. That should have been when I marched back inside, packed up my family, and left everything behind. But I didn't. Because deep down I still believed I could fix this. That if I just kept pushing forward, the pieces would finally come together and I'd find something solid to stand on. I was wrong. Later that evening, after washing the dirt off and putting Tessa to bed, I laid the new doll on the kitchen table and stared at it with Jenna. We didn't speak much. There wasn't anything left to say that hadn't already been whispered or cried about or shouted into the dark. The discovery of this second doll didn't clarify anything. It only deepened the pit we were sinking into. Jenna kept rubbing her temple like she had a migraine, eyes fixed on the burn mark across the doll's cheek. "That's not Bella," she said quietly. "That's something else." I didn't disagree. But then Jenna said something that made my stomach turn. What if this was the original? What if Bella was never the first? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. A text from Paul. Just 2 words. "Call me." I stepped out onto the back porch and dialed. He picked up after the first ring, voice strained and low. "Something happened," he said. I didn't know who else to tell. Apparently, Paul had gotten a package. No return address. Just a small padded envelope that arrived with his morning mail. Inside was a photograph, an old one, black and white, showing a young boy standing next to a lake. The boy looked eerily like Paul. But the photo was dated 1957 on the back, scrawled in faded pencil, were the words, "He looks just like me." Alongside the photo was a torn scrap of cloth, pink gingham, like a doll's dress, and a hand-drawn map. One that looked strikingly similar to the park we all used to visit as kids. "You think someone's messing with us?" Paul asked, clearly trying to rationalize. "You think maybe some twisted prank?" But his voice lacked conviction. Because I swear to God, I've never seen that picture before in my life. But I remember that lake. I remember standing there. I just don't remember why. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about our family. Or even just Alira. Something deeper was running beneath all of this, like an underground stream we'd only just stumbled into. Maybe this had always been there, hiding beneath layers of forgotten memory, repressed trauma, and generational silence. Maybe we were just the unlucky ones to finally dig deep enough to stir it awake. Jenna's reaction to Paul's story wasn't what I expected. She didn't look surprised. She just looked tired. And then she told me something that made my blood run cold. "Lucas, my mom didn't want Tessa to have the doll. When your mom brought it over, she pulled me aside in the kitchen. She told me to give it back, said those kinds of things don't leave once they're invited in." I stared at her. "And you didn't say anything?" Jenna's eyes welled up. I didn't want to believe her. She's always been superstitious. She sees ghosts in coffee stains, hears voices in static. I thought she was just being her. But now I wasn't so sure. We decided to drive up the next day to see her mom, Diane. She lived in a small farmhouse about 40 minutes outside town, surrounded by woods, dead cell zones, and long-forgotten secrets. The kind of place where time felt heavier. When we arrived, Diane was already on the porch like she'd been waiting for us. She didn't smile, didn't ask questions. She just looked at me and said, "You found her, didn't you?" That's when she brought us inside and pulled out an old shoebox filled with papers, photographs, and letters. She flipped through them until she landed on a brittle, yellowed envelope marked to be burned. Inside were newspaper clippings, articles from the 1940s, one in particular catching my attention. A child's death. Drowning. The name matched. Alira Tinsley, age 7. But what shocked me most wasn't the article. It was the handwritten note stapled to it. In unfamiliar handwriting, it read, "Asterisk doll returned by post. Do not reopen. She remembers. Asterisk." There were other notes. Some in Diane's handwriting, some older, belonging to her mother. Scribbled thoughts. Ramblings. One said, asterisk the eye follows. Don't sleep in the same room twice. Asterisk another simply read, if the second child draws her, it's already too late. I looked up at Diane, shaking. Why didn't anyone tell us? She sat down hard on the worn-out recliner, her face pale. Because no one remembers until it's already started. That's how it works. It skips through time. Feeds on forgetfulness. You don't believe until the patterns return. Until you find the doll, and realize it found you first. We drove back in silence. That night, I went back through my childhood photo albums, something I hadn't touched in years. I was searching for, well, I didn't know exactly. A hint, a connection, something my own memory had buried. And then I saw it, a picture from my 6th birthday. Me blowing out candles, laughing, and sitting at the end of the table half in frame, a doll. Porcelain. Same painted smile. Same curled hair. Same eyes. I asked my mom about it the next morning. She denied everything. Said she didn't remember ever giving me a doll. Said maybe it was a cousin's, maybe it just happened to be there. I asked her if she remembered where she got Bella. She just shook her head and said, that store didn't seem right. But then she added, you know, your father never liked dolls either. Used to say they watched him in his sleep. My dad had passed away 5 years ago. He'd always been quiet about his past, never talked about childhood much. Now I was starting to understand why. Back home, things escalated. Tessa began waking with scratches on her arms, thin and red like fingernails. Her drawings became darker. One showed a window with eyes outside. Another showed a fire. Then she stopped speaking altogether for almost 2 full days. Just stared. And when she finally spoke, it was in a voice that didn't sound like hers. I remember, she said to Jenna. I remember burning. That same day, Paul called again. His apartment had been broken into. Nothing stolen, except the photo and the map. Everything else left untouched. And on the wall above his bed, drawn in what looked like ash, were 2 names. Elira. Tessa, *. We still don't know who did it. There were no fingerprints. No signs of forced entry. The door was locked from the inside. But Paul swears he felt someone watching him all night, just beyond the doorway. So now, we're left with more questions than answers. How far does this go back? Is this something our families have been carrying unknowingly? Is there someone or something making sure we never piece it all together? Because just when I thought we were starting to understand the truth, another note appeared, folded neatly in Tessa's backpack. It read, *, there's another one. She's not the only girl who burned. *. I couldn't stop staring at the note. *, there's another one. She's not the only girl who burned. *, that line echoed in my skull like a slow, steady drumbeat. I sat at the kitchen table, the house eerily quiet, save for the occasional click of the old wall clock and the low hum of the fridge, sounds that once brought comfort, but now just filled the silence with tension. I tried to make sense of it, but nothing fit neatly anymore. The clues didn't add up, they never had. We were standing in the middle of something ancient, something twisted, and every time we peeled back a layer, the air around us seemed to tighten, like whatever was hiding behind the curtain of our reality didn't want us digging further. I looked over at Tessa's backpack sitting by the door, wondering how the note had gotten in there. We'd started watching her constantly. She never left our sight. But still, someone had slipped it in. Or something. That possibility was beginning to feel less insane with each passing day. By the time Jenna came home from the grocery store, my mind was already spiraling into worst-case scenarios. I told her about the note. She didn't react the way I expected. She just closed her eyes and sat down across from me, like she'd been bracing herself for more bad news. I think I'm being followed, she said quietly. My heart skipped. What do you mean? She hesitated. For the last few days, whenever I leave the house, I keep seeing the same car. Red Honda. Tinted windows. Doesn't matter if I'm going to the store, the pharmacy, even just picking up coffee. It's always parked somewhere nearby. Never moves. The driver's always just sitting there. I didn't ask why she hadn't told me sooner. I knew why. Same reason I hadn't told her when I thought I heard footsteps outside Tessa's window 2 nights earlier, even though we live on a 2nd floor. We were both trying to hold the line, trying to keep a sense of normalcy for Tessa's sake. But things were slipping fast, and pretending otherwise wasn't helping anymore. So that night, I took Jenna's keys and drove around town by myself. Every back street. Every side road. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe the red car. Maybe the store that vanished. Maybe someone watching from the shadows. I didn't find the car. But I did find something else. Something I hadn't told anyone about.
Yet.
At the edge of town, there's an old industrial complex, long since shut down, fenced off with rusted metal and half-sunken warning signs. I used to ride my bike past it as a teenager, always too scared to go in. That night, I saw a light flickering behind the second-story window of the main building. Just a dim glow, like candlelight, or maybe a lantern. I parked down the road and climbed the fence, heart pounding in my ears. Inside, the air was stale, filled with dust and oil, and something else, something foul like scorched cloth. I crept up the stairs, every step echoing like a gunshot in the silence. And when I reached the top floor, I found what looked like an abandoned office. But on the wall, written in charcoal or soot, were the same two names. Elira. Tessa, asterisk. Below it, a date. October 17th. That was in 2 days. I drove home shaking, the cold from the building still stuck in my bones. I didn't know what was going to happen on the 17th, but I knew we weren't ready for it. I decided to go to the police, not because I thought they'd believe me, but because I needed it on record. Something. Anything. But when I arrived at the station and asked for Detective Abrams, the officer behind the desk looked at me blankly. "There's no one here by that name," he said. I insisted. Told him we'd spoken months ago, back when I reported someone lurking near the school where Tessa went to kindergarten. The officer checked the system again. "You must be mistaken. We've never had a Detective Abrams." I even described the man, mid-40s, bald, glasses heavy set, had a limp. The officer blinked slowly, like I was speaking in riddles. "That's not anyone who's worked here. You sure you got the right department?" The world tilted slightly in that moment. I walked out of the building numb, half convinced I was losing my mind. I tried calling the number I'd saved under Abrams' name months ago. "The number you have dialed is not in service." That was when the real fear started creeping in. Not just fear for what we were dealing with, but fear that we'd already been dragged into something much larger, something that rewrote reality around us. Someone or something had been watching, playing along, maybe even planting breadcrumbs to lure us deeper. And now it was cleaning up behind itself, covering tracks, erasing people. That night, I didn't sleep. Jenna didn't either. We lay in the dark with Tessa between us, her breathing soft and rhythmic, completely unaware of how close to the edge we were. At some point, maybe around 3 a.m., I got up to get water. As I passed the hallway, something caught my eye, our front door. It was open. Not wide open, just ajar. I moved slowly toward it, adrenaline prickling across my arms. The lock was still in place. No signs of forced entry. I stepped outside and scanned the street. Nothing. Until I saw it. Parked 3 houses down, engine off, lights off, windows blacked out. Asterisk the red Honda Star. I went back inside and locked every door. Every window. Moved a chair under the front knob like I was living through a home invasion. And in the morning, I checked the driveway. Nothing there. No tire marks. No sign of the car ever existing. Later that day, Paul stopped returning my calls. His text stopped too. Jenna tried calling his office. He wasn't there. He hadn't shown up all morning. That wasn't like him. The man's a control freak, always punctual to a fault. I drove to his apartment. His car was gone. But taped to his door, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was a folded piece of paper. I pulled it down and opened it. It was a drawing.
Crude. Childlike.
But unmistakable. A fire. A house burning. And in the flames, 3 figures. 2 adults. And a child. There were no names written this time. Only the date. October 17th. October 17th began without warning. No omen. No shadows stretching across the sky. Just a normal fall morning in our quiet little town. The leaves were golden and crunchy underfoot. The air was brisk, and Tessa was humming in her room like nothing in the world had changed. Like there wasn't a fire drawing closer to our doorstep with every passing hour. I didn't know what I expected to happen that day. Maybe a knock at the door, a scream, the return of the red Honda, but what I got was far stranger. Paul showed up. He'd been missing for 2 days. Jenna and I had nearly filed a report. But there he was, standing on our front porch with a duffel bag and this strange, distant look in his eyes. He didn't knock. He just waited for me to open the door. "I figured it out," he said quietly, like we'd just spoken an hour earlier. "But you're not going to believe me." His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken since he left. His clothes were rumpled and smelled faintly of something metallic, oil, maybe, or blood. We brought him inside. He refused to sit, pacing instead like the floor was on fire. "You ever hear of the Bright Hollow fire?" he asked. I blinked. "The what?" Paul nodded. "Of course you haven't. That's the point. But I did some digging. My father was a journalist before he passed. He kept these old local newspaper clippings in his garage, filed under all the towns he used to write for. Turns out, 32 years ago, a fire ripped through a small unincorporated neighborhood not far from here. All records of it were buried. There's barely a mention online. But it was real. A preschool was destroyed. 3 children died. The official cause was a gas leak. But there were whispers, rumors of ritual markings found under the floorboards. Symbols in chalk. Authorities scrubbed it clean. Suppressed it. Some families were paid off. Others just disappeared. He stopped and looked at me. "One of those families lived in your house." Everything around me stilled. Jenna reached for Tessa instinctively, who was watching us from the couch, clearly sensing something was off. Paul dropped his bag to the floor and unzipped it. Inside were old photocopies, black and white, some nearly falling apart with age. In one of them, there was a grainy photo of a little girl standing in front of a weathered swing set. Her face was smudged by time, but the shape of her eyes, her jawline, they looked unmistakably like Tessa's. Or maybe Alira's. "You see it, don't you?" Paul whispered. "She's not the first. They're always girls. Always around the same age. Always tied to this place. Different towns, different names. But the pattern is the same. A girl disappears, or burns. Then another appears a few years later, same face. Different life." It hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about ghosts. It wasn't about hauntings. It was a cycle. I suddenly remembered the strange burn mark on Tessa's shoulder. Faint, like an old scar. The one we always assumed was from an accident at daycare. What if it wasn't? What if it was a mark carried over? Paul sat down, shaking now. "They call them echoes. Not reincarnations. Not clones. Something older. Energy repeating. A life that wasn't finished trying to find a way back. But each time it returns, it loses more of what it was. Until only one thing remains. The fire." He looked up at me. "That's what Alira was trying to stop. She knew. That's why she ran. That's why she screamed when she saw your house. She remembered." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Jenna stood up and walked into the kitchen. She didn't say a word. I followed her. Found her standing by the sink, gripping the counter. "There's something I never told you," she whispered. "When I was pregnant with Tessa, I had dreams. Constantly. Of fire. Of a little girl standing in the middle of it, untouched. Staring at me. I thought it was just anxiety. But then, after Tessa was born, I had this moment. In the hospital. I looked at her face and thought, I've seen you before. Not in the dream. Somewhere else. Somewhere real. But I pushed it down. I didn't want to sound crazy." She turned to face me, eyes glossy with fear. "What if she's not our daughter?" I didn't have an answer. All I had were questions, growing, spiraling questions that unraveled everything I thought I understood about our lives, our choices, even our memories. And then, just before nightfall, the letter arrived. Slipped under our door. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Not a recent one. A faded, yellowed picture, curled at the corners. A man and a woman standing in front of the very same house we now lived in. Between them, a young girl, again, with Tessa's face. Only this time, someone had scribbled across the bottom in shaky handwriting. "She always comes back." Beneath that, one final line that stopped my breath cold. "Next time, don't let her remember." Paul didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We took shifts, sitting near Tessa's room, guarding the door like that alone could protect her from whatever was spiraling beneath the surface of this story. By 4 a.m., the shadows felt heavier, thicker somehow. There was a constant hum in the walls, like the house itself was holding its breath. And through it all, I kept staring at the photo we'd found in the envelope, tracing my finger along the outline of the girl who looked too much like my daughter. The handwriting haunted me. She always comes back.
But why?
And who sent it? That was the question eating at my mind. Not just who knew, but who was watching. At sunrise, I made the mistake of confronting my mother. I hadn't seen her in weeks, not since the night she dropped off the doll. But after everything that happened after Paul's research and the photo, I realized there was one person who knew more than she ever let on. She answered her door like she'd been expecting me. "Come in," she said, no surprise in her voice. Her living room smelled of cinnamon and old books, same as it always had, but something about it felt colder now. I didn't even sit down before I asked, "Where did you get that doll?" She turned toward me slowly, her expression unreadable. "I was wondering when you'd ask." She walked over to a cabinet in the hallway and pulled out a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside were photos, old ones, newspaper clippings, hospital bracelets, burned letters. I stared at one clipping, stunned. Foster family missing after fire Guts rural home. No names were visible, just black and white images of police and firefighters searching through rubble. My mom's hands trembled slightly as she took a seat across from me. "I wasn't supposed to take you in," she said quietly. "Your case was sealed. You weren't supposed to exist on paper. But when they brought you to me, I recognized your face. I'd seen it in dreams. Over and over. Same as your daughter's now. And when the dreams came back, I knew the cycle had started again." It took me a minute to realize what she meant. My mouth went dry. "You're saying I was part of this?" She nodded. "You don't remember. They never do. That's the rule. But something went wrong this time. You carried some of it with you. It's why your memory's always been scattered, why you sometimes forget things for no reason. It's a defense mechanism, to keep it from breaking through." My knees nearly buckled. My whole life had felt like a patchwork of half-memories and strange déjà vu moments, faces I swore I'd met before, smells that triggered panic, dreams I couldn't explain. And now it was being laid out in front of me like it had all been pre-written. "So what do I do?" I asked. "How do I protect Tessa?" She looked away. "That's not the question you should be asking." And that's when she handed me a sealed envelope, with my name written on it in the same shaky handwriting from the photo. "This came for you yesterday." I didn't open it. My fingers fumbled with the flap, my chest tightening. Inside was a single piece of paper.
Typed. Clean. Precise. It read,
Asterisk, you can stop the cycle now. Take her back to where it began. You know the place. You've seen it in your dreams. Leave her there by dawn. Walk away. No one else has to get hurt. Asterisk. But if you keep her, you burn too. I read it 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each word. There it was, an ultimatum. My daughter's life in one hand, the truth in the other. And no matter which way I turned it, the ending was fire. Back at home, I didn't tell Jenna right away. How could I? How do you tell the woman you love that your daughter might not fully belong to either of you, that you may have once lived and died before as someone else, and that everything you are is just a recycled echo of a past you can't even remember? Paul tried to help me think clearly, but he was just as shaken. He showed me one last piece of evidence he'd been holding on to, unsure if it was too much. A journal entry. Not mine. Not Jenna's. Not even Alira's. It belonged to a woman named Carol Hastings. Dated 1989. She'd written about a child, her daughter, who began blinking at night in unnatural rhythms. Her words were panicked, disjointed. She claimed the child would whisper names in her sleep, names of children who died in the Bright Hollow fire. She claimed the girl had never been born, not in the way others were. She was found, Carol wrote, left outside the door, wrapped in a scorched blanket.
She smiled when she saw me.
I thought she was an angel. I didn't realize she'd burned before. Carol ended her journal the night before the fire. Her body was never recovered. I looked at Tessa that night as she slept, peaceful, unaware, clutching that horrible doll that we still couldn't get her to part with. And for the first time, I questioned everything. Was she really my daughter? Or was she something wearing her face? And if I didn't take her back where it began by dawn, what would happen to all of us? Because now I had a choice to make: keep her and risk all our lives, or leave her in the same place this nightmare began, with no guarantee she'd survive the night. And the worst part? I was starting to think I already knew what I'd done last time, and why I burned for it. It started with the drive. Silent, tense, like the road itself was holding a secret I wasn't ready to hear. Jenna sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, jaw locked, her eyes shifting from me to the horizon like she was trying to read a future that refused to be written. Tessa slept in the back seat, her little head leaning against the window, the doll still clutched to her chest like a lifeline. The map I'd traced from my dreams, a burned farmhouse deep in the woods outside of Marble Creek, sat folded in my glove compartment. I didn't know what we'd find there. I didn't even know if we'd come back. But the clock was ticking, and the paper's threat still rang in my ears. Leave her there by dawn, or burn too. What I didn't know was that we weren't alone on that road. Paul had been following us. And he wasn't the only one. We reached the clearing just as the sky turned violet blue, that eerie color that always makes the world feel like it's caught between sleep and something darker. The foundation of the old farmhouse stood like broken teeth against the earth, crumbling and scorched. This was the place from my dream, the place my mother warned me about. Jenna stayed with Tessa in the car while I stepped out, flashlight shaking in my grip. The air was thick with ash and memory. The soil still smelled like fire. Then I heard the voices. At first, I thought they were in my head. But as I crept behind what was once a front porch, I saw shadows, people.
5.
Maybe 6. Standing in a wide circle around something buried. They didn't look up when I stepped closer, but I knew one of them instantly.
Paul. He wasn't just following me. He'd brought them.
I froze. They were digging. One of the others turned, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Officer Niles, the cop who'd taken our report weeks ago when Tessa first screamed about the doll blinking. She locked eyes with me for a moment, then looked away like I wasn't even real. That's when I realized this wasn't about us. It never had been. It was bigger, older, rooted in this place like mold on bone that I stepped on a twig, and they all stopped. Paul looked up. His face went pale, caught between guilt and resolve. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said. "See what?" I asked, my voice cracking. He sighed, dropping the shovel. "The return. The cycle. She's not the first, you know. And she won't be the last. We've all had one." The words made no sense. "Had one? A child," Niles said, her voice low. "They come back in waves. Always tied to someone who's cracked. Lost something. That's why they find you. They know who's most vulnerable. It's not a demon, not a ghost. It's older than those words. Something that attaches itself to memory.
To grief.
It becomes who we lost, until we don't question it anymore." "You're insane," I whispered. But Paul shook his head. "You brought her back. You did. 10 years ago, in that fire. You don't remember, because it made sure you wouldn't. But we do.
We all lost something that day.
And we all agreed. If it comes back again, we end it. Before it spreads." My mind was spinning. I took a step back. "What are you saying? That Tessa's not real?" "She is real," Paul said. "She's just not yours." My knees gave out. Everything around me blurred. Flashes of the fire, of faces I couldn't name, of a hospital room and a child crying out my name with someone else's voice. It was like the memories were unzipping themselves inside my skull. But then I heard Jenna scream. I ran back to the car. The back seat was empty. The window was shattered from the inside. Jenna was on the ground, blood on her hands, claw marks down her arms. "She changed," she sobbed. I looked at her, and she changed. Her eyes weren't hers anymore. They were burning. I turned to Paul, but he was already raising the shovel again. It's not too late, he said. We can bury it before sunrise. That's the only way to stop the next wave. I wanted to scream, to fight, to protect what little belief I had left in the child I swore was mine. But in that moment, I realized I didn't know what was real anymore. Tessa's laughter, her drawings, her sleepy hugs at night, were those hers, or memories I'd projected onto something pretending to be her? The others moved closer. Niles held a burlap sack, too small for an animal. It was writhing. Then it whispered my name. And that's when everything snapped. Because what none of them knew, what I had just remembered, was that 10 years ago, during the fire, I didn't lose a child. I buried one. And now she was back, waiting for me to choose. The night air was thick and suffocating, the kind that presses down on your chest and steals your breath before you even realize it. The first light of dawn was hours away, but the embers of the old fire still glowed faintly in the ruins beneath my feet, a heartbeat pulsing through the ash like some dark, ancient warning. I stood there in the middle of the circle, surrounded by faces I once trusted: Paul, Officer Niles, the others whose names I didn't even know but who carried the weight of this nightmare like a twisted badge. And then there was the burlap sack, trembling and whispering, the faintest sound like the fragile breathing of something trapped between worlds. I felt my heart threaten to shatter. This was it. The moment where everything would either burn to ash or finally be put to rest. Paul's voice cut through the silence, cold and steady. You brought her back, and now you have to choose. End this, or watch it consume everyone you love. The others nodded, their eyes flickering with the same haunted fear that had eaten at me for weeks. I knew what he meant. This wasn't just about Tessa. It was about the cycle, the endless repetition of loss and fire, the echo of a child's scream that had stretched through decades, binding all of us to the same tragic story. I knelt and slowly untied the burlap sack, my hands trembling. Inside, I saw her, the girl from the photographs, the name I'd only whispered in dreams. Alira. Her eyes flickered open, haunting and deep, holding a pain I could barely comprehend. She looked at me and smiled, a smile that was both warm and terrifying. It's time, she whispered, voice echoing like wind through dry leaves. You have to remember. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled. The fire reignited, licking the edges of the ruins like hungry tongues, casting flickering shadows that twisted and writhed. I felt the heat sear my skin, but I couldn't look away. Alira's gaze burned into mine as memories crashed over me, visions of the past lives tangled with mine, the faces of children lost to flames, the betrayal of those I thought I trusted. I remembered the fire, the scream, the choice I made to save one and bury another alive, a secret I'd buried deep within myself along with the ashes. Tears streamed down my face as the truth tore through me. I wasn't just a victim of this curse, I was its keeper. The fire wasn't just destruction, it was a cleansing. And I had chosen who lived and who died. That was why Tessa carried the mark, why she was both real and unreal, a flicker of a life that never quite fully came to be. Paul stepped forward, raising the shovel. End it now. But just as I reached out to stop him, Jenna's scream shattered the night. I spun around to see her struggling with Tessa, whose eyes had shifted into something dark and wild, glowing faintly with a fire not of this world. The doll slipped from Tessa's hands and landed near the flames, the painted eyes suddenly blinking in the flickering light. No, Jenna cried. She's not evil. She's trying to tell us something. In that moment, everything shattered. The cycle, the fear, the endless repetition, it wasn't about destruction. It was about memory, about acknowledgement, about breaking the silence that had kept us trapped. Alira reached out a pale hand and touched Tessa's cheek. The fire dimmed instantly, the shadows retreating like a tide. Remember me, she said softly. Remember who you are. The doll's blinking stopped. Paul dropped the shovel. The others looked at each other, confused and uncertain. And then the earth rumbled again, louder this time, a deep growl that shook the very bones beneath us. The ground cracked open, revealing an underground chamber filled with old relics, photos, toys, letters, evidence of every lost child who had been swallowed by this cycle. Among them, a small wooden box with my name carved into it. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, faded but clear. To break the cycle, you must forgive what you've forgotten. As I looked up, Jenna took Tessa's hand, and I realized the choice wasn't about fire or sacrifice. It was about acceptance, accepting the pain, the loss, and the truth buried deep within all of us. But before I could say anything, a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying a voice I didn't expect, a voice that wasn't Alira's or Tessa's, but my own mother's. She never wanted you to remember, the voice whispered, because the truth is worse than the fire. And then the ground beneath us split wide open. The earth beneath us trembled and shifted, opening a cavernous void that swallowed the remaining shadows, the whispers, and the fire's last flickering embers. As the dust settled, the weight of years, decades, even centuries, seemed to lift from my shoulders, leaving behind a strange emptiness that was both terrifying and, in a way, freeing. I stood there with Jenna, holding Tessa's hand tightly, feeling the steady pulse of her small fingers against mine, grounding me in a reality that was as fragile as it was precious. The doll, now lifeless and still, lay forgotten by the ashes, its blinking eyes extinguished, but forever etched in my memory. The truth that had nearly broken me was finally out in the open. The cycle wasn't just a haunting, a ghost story, or a curse. It was a legacy of grief and denial passed down through generations, a story no one dared to tell, hidden beneath layers of fire, fear, and forgotten names. I had been both victim and guardian, trapped in a web spun from my own past decisions and the choices of those who came before me. But now, somehow, the chains felt looser. Alira, Tessa, and the other lost girls were echoes of something deeper, reminders that pain doesn't just disappear, it echoes until it's acknowledged. That night, as dawn's first light bathed the charred earth, I realized that breaking the cycle wasn't about erasing the past, but about embracing it, with all its dark corners and unspoken truths. We drove away from the ruins in silence, the road ahead uncertain but open, carrying with us the knowledge that some wounds might never fully heal, but they don't have to define us. Back home, life felt both heavier and more fragile, every smile from Tessa a reminder of the miracle of presence and the burden of memory. The doll never came back. Sometimes at night, when the house grows still, I swear I catch a faint flicker in the corner of my eye, like a shadow refusing to fade, a blink from the past reaching out just enough to remind me the story isn't truly over. Maybe it never will be, because some mysteries live inside us long after the flames die down, urging us to listen, to remember, and to keep fighting for the light beyond the darkness. And as I watch Tessa grow, laughing, learning, and simply being, I wonder, how much of her is new, and how much is a spark from those who came before? That question, more than any answer, stays with me. It lingers, like the last ember glowing softly in the night, waiting for the next story to be told.